All right, hello, and welcome to this month's Women in Architecture event. We are very happy to have you all here with us tonight, and we would like to extend a special welcome to those attending one of our events for the very first time. I'm Aveen, and I am a member of the programming committee. I would like to start off by acknowledging that we are all located in different cities across Canada, or perhaps even different countries, and therefore on different unceded territories. But in particular, those of us in Vancouver are on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. And so we thank them for sharing their land with us. We would love to know more about you, our attendees. Let us know in the chat to all panelists and attendees from what part of the city, country, or even world you are joining us from. Now for some housekeeping. As I mentioned previously, for those of you who are looking to collect their AIVC credit, please include your name, email address, and license number in the chat to all panelists. If you would like to be part of our email list to follow our future events and aren't already, please follow the link on our website at wiavancouver.org. At Women in Architecture, we are always looking for volunteers, whether it's through communications, organizing events, or special projects. Currently, we are looking for a volunteer coordinator, and to anyone who is interested, they can connect via our website. If you would like to be part of our community, please follow the link on our website, once again, at wiavancouver.org. If you would like to provide financial support, you can do so by becoming a member, also through our website. And lastly, tonight's event will be recorded and made available on our website as well in the coming weeks. Finally, moving on to the main event is tonight's seminar on public space, designing for flexibility and activation. COVID-19 has reinforced the importance of good urban public spaces with permanent and flexible features where temporary events and activations can be held. We have with us three very special guests, Will Sorrell, Jody Phillips, and Haily Zaki. Will is a partner at First Place Agency. He recently moved to Victoria from London, UK, where he ran large-scale cultural and design events, as well as international placemaking initiatives. Jody Phillips is a longtime Vancouverite and a partner at First Place Agency. As a former product designer, Jody was director of IDS Vancouver prior to her national role as IDS brand director until February of this year. Haily Zaki is the founder of the LA Design Festival, the nonprofit organization that curates and runs the annual citywide series of events celebrating LA's design culture. She also runs Secret Agent, a creative communications consultancy. Together, they will be discussing how installations create life in places, how architecture and landscaping play a role in this, and how flexible design in the public realm can account for the unexpected. The Q&A portion of tonight's event will happen at the end of the seminar, and for that, we have prepared a Menti presentation. By going to menti.com and entering the code on the screen or in the chat, from now until the Q&A, you will be able to post your questions on this platform directed towards a speaker specifically, to all three generally, or to those that have already been asked, which you find interesting as well. You will also be given 5 minutes at the end of the seminar to like or pose your final questions, and we will ask our speakers the most popular ones. We very much hope that you enjoy. And Will, if you're ready.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much to Women in Architecture Vancouver for having us. It's lovely to be here. And thank you everyone who's attending and giving up a lovely, warm, kind of early summer evening to sit inside and listen to us. It's very nice to have you. Just briefly about First Place, Jody and I founded First Place, and we work with property developers, city planners and architects to make cities better with art and design commissions. So this includes temporary installations that mark a moment in a building or an area's creation, or meanwhile projects pre-development. It also includes permanent public art pieces created not only by artists, by some of the most creative designers in the world as well. So I'm going to look at what I think is a fantastic example of public space, which is King's Cross in London, a recent development. We're going to have a look at the context of the site, the buildings that have been designed and the tenants that have gone into them, the public spaces in between them, the events program they had already, the Design Junction event, which I ran, and how that worked, and issues with the site, because nothing's perfect. And if we have time, I'll briefly look at Trafalgar Square as well as another example. So first of all, the site context, and just to say, I wasn't actually involved in the development of the site at all. It's a place that I know and love. I grew up about 15 minutes walk from there. My mum and dad, when they had launched their graphic design business in the 80s, it was the place where you could get cheap studio space because it was really sketchy place. It was known for vice and drugs. And about 15 years ago, this 67-acre parcel of land got bought by a developer called Argent, and they started this process of building, which is it's very nearly complete now. It's going to be 3.4 million square feet of office space, 5,000 square foot of retail leisure, 2,000 homes, and 26 acres of public space. And they're paying about £4 billion sterling for that. It's incredibly central in London. So it's very close to the British Museum and London Zoo, and right next to Euston Road, which is the main vehicle artery between East and West London. And it's right next to two major train stations, King's Cross Station, where it gets its name, which is the train link between London and the north of England and Scotland, and St Pancras, where you can get a train to the Midlands, the middle of the country, or you can get on the Eurostar and go to Paris, Brussels, or Amsterdam direct from there as well. So they're starting off with a very good central site. And the history of this site, this is the Granary building, which I'll talk about quite a lot. King's Cross was this connector to the rest of England, to London during the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. So the Granary building, obviously, they stored grain there, and grain was brought in on canal barges from the rest of the country, and that fueled the Industrial Revolution in London. And on the left of this picture, there's a building called Coldrops Yard, which again I'll talk about. And it's two parallel buildings which a train would go down the middle and drop, which are transported into London from north of England. So it's been a very important site, and it fell into disrepair as modes of transport changed and was derelict for a large part of the 1900s, and then became a place for cheap offices and warehouses, and it became a club venue, one of the most famous venues of the London 90s rave scene. Bagley's was there, so that's what it was known for. And looking at the site itself, you can see it's kind of, there's a hard border around it of roads on one side and train tracks on the other, with a canal running through the middle of it. So that's what they had to work with in the site. So I'm going to fast forward and look at some of the completed buildings and very briefly touch on the architecture of the site to show you the very high bar they set for themselves with the look and feel of it. The very first thing they did is the Granary building. And so this was a masterstroke of placemaking. Stanton Williams did a very sympathetic refurbishment of this building, and they managed to get Central St Martin's School of Art and Design as their first tenant on the site. So they're part of University of the Arts London, and they're the second ranked school in the world for art and design. So you've got absolutely nothing in this area where you've only been in if you're driving a van and you're a delivery driver, or you're going to a rave at 4 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly you've got 4,000 of the best art students from London, Europe and the world, and also the most fashionable as well, milling around this site. So it was a brilliant thing to do, and breathe life into it, and you can see what sort of activities their design school is amazing as well. Looking at some of the other buildings, skipping to something completely different, this is by Wilkinson Eyre, the gas holders building, and the steel frame used to hold containers where gas was stored, and they turned it into a luxury apartment complex. Coldrops Yard, which Thomas Heatherwick re-envisaged, and he bought the two parts of it I mentioned and brought them together, made the roofs and the structure kiss in the middle, and it's now a retail area. It's kind of like outdoor mall for premium brands. 4 Pancras Square by Eric Parry Architects. This is very prominent in the development, and Universal Music now have this as their London headquarters. The Aga Khan Foundation decided to build their UK headquarters there by Mackie & Mackie Architects, and as you can see, it's got both Islamic and Japanese influences, and they have 6 beautiful outdoor gardens dotted around on balconies and the roof. The Cole office looking over Coldrops Yard, it remains pretty much in the same state it was on the outside, but inside it's Tom Dixon's headquarters. He moved in a few years ago, so there's 100 of his staff and their shop and workshops as well. And sorry about the grainy image, this is going to be Google's London headquarters. They've got buildings all around London, and they're pulling all, I think it's 3,000 workers together in this building that's not only designed by Bjarke Ingels, but also by Thomas Heatherwick. It's been dubbed a landscraper because if you stood it up, it would be the tallest building in London. So that's to say that they have an amazing range of very impressive tenants on the site. They haven't come in all at the same time. It's been dribs and drabs over the last decade. So public spaces wise, the landscaping master plan was done by Townshend landscape architects, and they worked with the gardener Dan Pearson. So they, again, very good team. And I'm just going to whiz through them very quickly to give you the lay of the land. This is Pancras Square. So this actually isn't really used for activations or events. It's a kind of oasis in the middle of some high-rise office blocks. So it's a place for workers to meet and have lunch or a coffee. That's when the weather's nice like this. Granary Square, which is in front of the Granary building and overlooking the canal. You can see, I'll put that picture up again from the 1800s, and this is it today. And the Granary building and the extension behind it is all Central St. Martin's. And one thing they did, you can see the 4 patches there, they put in fountains, not only here, but other parts of the site. And it's been a very important part of the puzzle in creating these amazing public spaces. So in the winter, you can program the fountains to do anything, different colors, different heights, patterns, whatever you want. So in the winter, it's this beautiful glowing thing like having a fireplace on in the background. And in the summer, it's a beach. Families come from all over London, including local families, to play in the fountains. On the square as well, you've got lots of restaurants. And it's funny, I was putting this together thinking, why does this look different? Because you think of squares, you think of the archetypal Italian piazza, this social space with cafes. And I realized, okay, we're different in England because with piazzas, you're looking out, but for some reason, English people like to be behind a little fence with their backs turned to the action. And on the other side of the square is another Stanton Williams building, which is a new pub called the Lighterman. So it's surrounded by lots of different things and then framed on the other side by the canal. There are steps that they put in leading down from Granary Square to the canal. The canal towpath is a beautiful way to navigate London on foot, on a bicycle. It's a very busy bike route. So not only did they put in steps where you could access the canal and channels to get your pram or your bike up the stairs, they also created this public space, and it's activated all throughout the year. This is an example from the last few weeks. They put these lollipops all over it, which are, fun installation and also reasonably handy for breaking up crowds and social distancing. And they've had anything from yoga classes to putting a projector screen on the other side of the canal and screening Wimbledon tennis matches. Round the corner, they've got gardens which wrap around the side of the canal into the other buildings. And they have a kind of secret garden. It's not meant to be secret, but it's more protected and off the beaten track, which is a space for relaxation and play. So they've got a playground in there, and the planting at this point is very mature as well. And then Lewis Cubitt Park and Gardens is on the other side. And I should have said, sorry, for events, Granary Square is one of the main places for events, which I'll talk about in a minute. And this is the other one. So Lewis Cubitt Park, again, they had fountains, but there's a lot of open space, which is very flexible. And that park, they put on a lot of programming and have, soft play and sometimes circus performers, that kind of thing. And finally, there is the canopy, which is a covered area, very large space, which they sometimes use for events, exercise classes, anything. And it's right next to Waitrose, which is like, I was trying to think of the equivalent, it's kind of like a slightly posher Thrifties. It's a very upscale supermarket, and they've even got a wine bar and have jazz nights there as well. So it's an essential tool to have on the development because they've got all these new homes, so it needs its own supermarket, but it's also the best one in London. So all around these public spaces, pedestrians are in charge and cyclists are in charge. They work with the Mayor of London to put in loads of new cycling rental stations, and I hear they're doing the same with electric scooters now that they're trialing them being legal around London as well. And there are pedestrians everywhere. There is vehicle access, but it's very discreet. You can actually drop people off in a taxi, but visually you don't think you can. And there's even this road running through it with a pedestrian crossing, and every taxi driver in London hates it because that's where they pick passengers up from King's Cross from. That's where they go and queue up. and it takes them ages to get across because the pedestrians are flowing across. And I've asked King's Cross about this, and they say, we don't care, it's 100% pedestrian first sight. I think part of the puzzle, as I didn't mention, another one of their tenants is actually the local authority, Camden Council. That's we call it the borough. So you have the city and then the borough, which is actually 250,000 people. It's one of the biggest sort of sections of the 33 boroughs in London. In terms of the events program, so what they did before Design Junction is a few different things. The first is meanwhile activations. As they were gearing up the site, they tried to put on different things to attract attention to it and also to make the local residents happy. They had a few housing blocks go up first, and these guys realized they would be living in the middle of a huge construction site for about 10 years, so they had to do various things to appease them. One of these was the King's Cross swimming pond, which was hugely popular. It got extended for a few years past its usual life, and there was a big protest, of course, when it finally had to come to an end. Curb Food Market has been there since the beginning, and this is on a pedestrianised boulevard leading from King's Cross Station up to the site. So the idea of it was to start drawing people up towards the main spaces of King's Cross. They tried a few one-off big events at King's Cross, and some worked and some didn't. This is Green Man Beer and Cider Festival. They also had some music as well, and it didn't work. It was hugely unpopular. You know, lots of people drinking outside was not great because you're overlooked by residential. So they realized that that kind of activation didn't work for them. One thing really did work that they did. There was a citywide light installation called Lumiere in London, in massive locations like Oxford Circus was the other main one, and this is in King's Cross. And that one proved hugely successful. So they started to think, what other big events can we have that take over the whole site? Finishing off on event spaces. So Coal Drops Yard by Thomas Heatherwick, I love it. It's a beautiful building. It has a lot of space down the middle. You'd need to have a lot of people in there for it to work. And Argent, the owners, quickly realized that. So they've had to invest quite heavily in activations throughout it. So this is Dan Pearson, who put thousands of geraniums down the center, and it works very well when there's an activation down the middle of it. So talking about Design Junction, it's a design event that I ran for a few years, and it's an exhibition of cutting edge contemporary design. So it has a strong trade element to it. It's contemporary lighting and furniture designers selling to specifying architects, retailers, and we have had a lot of exhibitors. We had 200 exhibitors lots from the UK, Scandinavia, mainly Europe, and a few from North America. And it was an interesting exhibition. So it had the trade element and a cultural one. We did lots of installations, special events, talks, and it was nomadic. So we changed venues every few years. And after doing a few inside, I'd started the conversation with King's Cross. And for them, it was perfect. They wanted the time actually, the Brexit saga was going on, talking about Britain leaving the EU, which was having combined with the 2008 financial crisis, having a very negative effect on retail sales for their Coal Drops Yard space. So they wanted something to breathe life into that campaign and let everyone know it was a centre for design and the creative industries, which they saw as one of the targets with their vision of the mix of the retail area. So they brought us on, and we decided to have the site, King's Cross as our site. So we took over the whole location with different buildings, events and activations. I'm not going to go through everything, so there's not time. Our main venue was a tented structure. They're ugly. Argent didn't want that at all. So we commissioned satellite architects who are based in the UK to use Grid, which is a Danish exhibition system that's usually used for exhibition plinths. And they built a 74-meter long visual baffle as you enter the structure. Inside it was a trade environment, but we tried not to make it too formulaic because there's a lot of trade show fatigue in London from all the events that happen there. Under the canopy, we built a kind of marketplace for designers wanting to reach retailers. So it could be luxury watches or fabrics. And we did our reception inside the central St. Martin's building as well. And we did our job of bringing a lot of people to the event. It's sad seeing this because we haven't done anything like this in a while, but we brought 3,500 visitors a day over the 5 days it was open. We had a good party on Granary Square to open it with a DJ set from Hot Chip, and we had a first installation was these 8 Monopoly houses on Granary Square. We were making a cheeky pun on the property development, and we had things like Dezeen had their watch store. We questioned on dyslexic designers and the fact that so many good designers are dyslexic. And also Dornbracht, the bathroom brand, did an installation where they took control of the fountains and they programmed them to synchronize with a string quartet who played 4 times a day, which was great because they got a good reaction from the audience they wanted to reach, which is you guys, architects. But at the same time, they had children loving it and dancing around them. And it was just, I love seeing those two worlds come together. The year after that on Granary Square, this is one of my favorite installations. It's called Gateways by the designer Adam Nathaniel Thurman, who at the time was up and coming and had done a few great things. And it's sponsored by Turkish Ceramics, and it represents the gates of Babylon. And so it's 4 archways, each covered in tiles from different manufacturers in Turkey. And it was a beautiful installation that really inspired people. I took an elementary school group of 60 kids through it, and they were blown away by it, and it caught the attention of the media in the UK as well. We used the canal steps, and we got a barge by Campari where you could get your Negroni and also design a bottle label. And we tied everything together. We created the King's Cross Creative Quarter, which showcased not only the activities we were doing, but the design-led retail and hospitality that's already there in King's Cross, really trying to tell the story of the whole site. So just why this was good. We got 240,000 people to the site over the 5 days of the show. I mentioned the number 3,500. That's inside the structures. This is additional people going around the public spaces. We helped them get customers into Coldrop's yard as well. At least 3 that I know of that we were directly involved in. We got a great award for it. We promoted it heavily, and we got about £4 million worth of press as well. We even got on BBC News, which was very nice. So King's Cross is I love it. I'm hugely biased because of family connections and living near there. But it's not perfect. So it's privately owned public space. Argent control the whole thing. You don't really know when you're crossing that threshold, and there are signs, but they're very discreet. And of course, you don't know the rules that they play by or you're playing by, giving your consent to cross that threshold. And they got in trouble, as you can see from this article. They had surveillance everywhere. In fact, the guy who was running the security was ex-counter-terrorist special branch, which is like FBI. And his control room was insane, and you could zoom right in on someone's face from several hundred yards away, and facial recognition, which was the cause of the backlash. And with this private security force that's around the site, and the type of affluence with the tenants that they have, they want to keep certain undesirables out. So if you're homeless, you're going to be shepherded off the site straight away. And so it's not the most inclusive site in the world. And the other problem is you have this generation of people who live in King's Cross. Just outside this site, there's a lot of social housing. So you've got people there who are, around 20 or coming up to their 20s, who for their whole lives, and when it opened a few years ago, they go and see what it's like, and they can't afford anything because it's fancy cafes and restaurants and businesses they don't fully understand or don't have access to. So there's a bit of an inequity in the area. Argent have tried to mitigate this. I think the fountains and all the family-focused events and the different things they put on, which are free to access, go a long way. Also, they do a few things, like there's one initiative which is a homework club that they organise with another organisation, where you can go and get specific help for different subjects. So if you're a 14 to 16-year-old at school, you're doing design and technology, you can go to a weekly after-school club at Google and get Googlers to help you with your design and technology homework. So they realise that it's an issue, and they're trying to deal with it. So I have talked for a tiny bit too long. I want to talk about Trafalgar Square as well, but I think maybe in the discussion, if we want to talk about a bit more of a public space rather than privately owned public, and we can maybe have that discussion afterwards, then I can bring this back up. But I think so that's England, that's that. Let's come back to North America, and I'm going to hand over to Haily now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Haily Zaki, and I'm the founder of the LA Design Festival. I'm going to be talking about public space through the lens of what we do for the LA Design Festival. So very kind of focused on it from that perspective. In the grand scheme of things, the LA Design Festival is really quite young. We're only about 11 years old. And we're still really quite scrappy. And we work really hard to make sure that the festival is reflective of the diversity and creative talent of LA. Anyone who has a perspective on design, who's part of the creative economy, is welcome to participate. We do our best to remove as many of the barriers to participation as possible. Almost all of the events are free. And really, the festival is less transactional. You know, it's not a trade show. It's really about building community and shining a spotlight on LA as the global design city that it is, and really kind of promoting LA's creative culture. I also run Secret Agent, which is a separate consultancy. We keep quite a clear separation between church and state, between the two, one being a nonprofit and the agency, you know, working for architecture and clients. But it's really interesting to kind of see the whole, the city from both sort of purviews and both perspectives. And definitely hosting a design festival, a citywide event that kind of brings so many people together is quite a challenge in a city like LA, especially because we are kind of a city that doesn't necessarily have a lot of public space. So like in London and in Vancouver, the LA Design Festival kind of started around one core seed, and that was actually a trade show called Dwell on Design several years ago. I guess now it's like a decade. But Dwell on Design was like a major trade show that was curated by Dwell Magazine. It brought everybody down to LA. You know, it started in San Francisco, but then moved to LA. And at the time, I was actually running PR for Dwell on Design, and we just noticed that while the show was absolutely great and the trade show was fantastic, it was a model that was a bit cost prohibitive for smaller firms, for a lot of the like local sort of up and coming designers. And it really, you know, when you walk the show floor, it wasn't necessarily representative of the whole scope of the creative community in LA. So that's why the LA Design Festival started. And in the early days, it was definitely a little bit of like the Wild West, precisely because there isn't really sort of like, there isn't really an urban core to LA. So when we started, it was very spread out, just like the city. And we kind of activated all over, whether it was showrooms or galleries or small squares. You can see like there's actually an installation here that we did in Chinatown in one of our first years, which was, it was just like a canopy made of plastic wine glasses that we all kind of sat around and made one weekend, and we kind of all got in trouble with the business improvement district for not asking permission to do it, but it was really fun anyways. But these sort of like, it was this like ecosystem of pocket disruptions all over the city, and it was really fun. But as time went on, we realized that we did need to kind of shorten the festival. It used to be 3 weeks. Which is insane. We shortened it down to 4 days. And we realized that we needed to kind of shorten it to give people a sense of urgency in a city like LA where there's so much happening. It makes sense to kind of condense things so that people feel the need to actually go and do and see the things that you're putting together for them. We also realized that we needed to make sure that the events were a little bit more thematically curated. The crowdsource thing was great at first, but to ensure a level of production, we started thematically curating things a little bit more to give people, I guess, conceptual continuity when they came. And then we also made sure that everything was a little bit more geographically choreographed to create this sense of place, which again in LA is an undeniable challenge. And that's because LA is a very weird place. It's a city like no other. I'm not sure how many of you on this call have been to LA, but I would bet that depending on where you stayed, who you stayed with, and the reason for which you came to LA, you might have like stayed relatively close to each other or in similar places, but your experiences of the city would be completely different. Um, and that's because LA is kind of a weird and wonderful place. We're often mistaken for this big, sort of monolithic urban omelet, but LA is really kind of this. It's a series of interconnected mini cities and towns and neighborhoods that's connected by these ribbons of asphalt and freeway and now train too. But for a city as wonderful as ours with such great weather, there's shockingly not a lot of highly activated public spaces. That's getting better. We have more parks. It's becoming sort of a better city for public space, but it is definitely a place where the public space that we do have tends to be privately owned. And as I was mentioning, there really is no true center. So for the festival, these were some of the main key physical challenges. It was like, how do we distill this festival down in the programming to a place where we can kind of, call it home and pull people together. The other challenge with LA is really this idea of culture in LA. There was actually just this story in the Atlantic 2 days ago, I think, that it was an op-ed where the author kind of called LA a modern city state, which I don't know about all that, but it is quite accurate in some ways. But one of the things that stuck out to me was this idea that in LA, civic life is optional. It feels optional. A lot of life in LA is kind of turned inward, or it's insular. People have their sort of work play triangle, or I guess now it's really not a triangle, it's more of like a dot when you're home, and then you leave home on occasion, but you're really quite insulated. And so this idea of civic life is different in LA than perhaps in other cities. And another thing that the author said that was really funny is that LA kind of feels less like a city of the present and more like a strange kingdom from the future, trying to tell us all something about what's coming next. So I kind of see some optimism in that. I'd like to think that there may be, there's room for some interesting things, and for LA to kind of be on the forefront of figuring some of these civic things out. But culturally, and I think this is something that we deal with in North America in general, design is not necessarily something that's baked into the culture here. And that tends to be a challenge when we're talking about, pulling together a massive citywide festival where we bring everybody together. It's kind of hard in a city like LA. Like the Bureau of Tourism is still very much about heads and beds, and like there's not really an arts and culture department, and it's just there is no public support. While LA is definitely a city that we have a mayor who puts a lot of importance on design. He did name the first ever chief design officer, who happens to be the architecture critic from the LA Times. That's been great. He's done some really awesome things like with design competitions, but at the end of the day, we're just not a city that unites around design, except for those 4 days of the LA Design Festival. And so I'm kind of going to go through the next few slides a little bit more quickly, but when we realized that we needed to have a geographically choreographed festival, we chose to work with Row DTLA. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Row, but it is this former industrial sort of campus that has recently been reimagined. It kind of lies on the cusp between the arts district and the fashion district in downtown LA. Right across the road from it, there's a new Herzog de Meuron project going up. There's another there's a Bjarke Ingels project going up. So it's in this area that has this part of the arts district that is really becoming kind of a starchitecture neighborhood, if you will. And Row, about 100 years ago, it used to be, well, before that, it used to be an orange grove, and then it became the site of, it was the end site of the South Pacific Railroad. And so it's the series of 5 or 6 really long warehouse buildings that have now been converted into luxury office space and multifaceted retail and restaurants. And the master plan was done by Rios. That's Mark Rios's firm. They're a landscape architecture and design and graphic design and product design firm. They're amazing. But they reimagined this 30-acre campus that kind of to embrace the historic character, but really kind of bring it to life as its own district. There are basically about 1.3 million square feet of creative office space, and then about 100 high-end retail stores. And then there's also a totally functioning produce market that opens up at like 4 a.m. every day. And on weekends, they have they used to, pre-pandemic, have this big food truck festival called Smorgasbord, which came to LA from New York. Anyway, so Row DTLA has sort of become the new de facto home for the LA Design Festival. And I think it's kind of an example of this private space, public space kind of negotiation. We took inspiration from Tortona during Milan Design Week. There's just like an energy and a quality to what you see in Tortona that we kind of wanted to bring to LA with its own LA flavor. And we started curating our own, their core events that we put on at Row, like the opening night and design block party, which is a rare occasion where we get thousands of people out into a street. It's a private drive, but it's kind of like a main street. We close it off and we pop up installations indoors, outdoors. There are dancers in the street. There's open bars and you can actually walk around, which is a nightmare to coordinate if it's not a private space. And all sorts of things. It's really one of those key events during the year that people look forward to because you can just catch up with everybody. Over the years, we've mounted some pretty amazing installations in collaboration with sponsors. This was from 2018. Literally built a house on top of the roof of Row. It had things broken up and brought up through an elevator, and we built a mini house. And this actual structure was then moved to, I believe, Shanghai by Mini Living, and it's part of an actual multifamily project now. This was an installation from 2019, and all of these installations kind of have a common thread. They're mostly crowdsourced from small and independent designers who just want a platform to sort of show their work and express themselves. And then on occasion, there are some like Mini Living, which are brand driven. And in 2020, we did obviously pivot because of the pandemic. All of the normal programs were sort of turned overnight into virtual programs, and we became producers overnight, figuring out how to use Zoom webinar and all of that to make all of that happen. But we did keep the installations. We still kept that component, and it was just great to kind of see that people still really hungered for that and still wanted to come out. Everything was passive. It was behind glass, and it was like a little bit less fun. We couldn't throw a big party, but people still came out to experience it and were really game. Oops, I can't play that inside. Sorry. Uh-oh, where'd it go? I wanted to play you a little video of this. This was one of the coolest installations. I had this sort of like moving light sort of order, and it was music dependent. And if you stood in front of it, you could hear the music and you could stare at your reflection, and it would like move you in through the lights, and it was very trippy. It was really fun. But now we get to the nuts and bolts of like funding and for like how a festival like this happens in LA. You know, we don't have the public support that some of our counterparts have, and so we're quite scrappy about it. And I would say like the majority of the funding for the LA Design Festival happens through sort of community, smaller crowdsourced sponsorships. But then we are also getting to the point where we can go after some of these larger sponsorships, and kind of that helps us increase the production value of what we're doing. I think that, you know, all in all, the value and what the LA Design Festival brings to LA is kind of really just giving people a platform and shining a spotlight on LA as a global design city. And I think there's a lot that is still untapped that we're working to tap, and that, you know, like design tourism and all of that. But it will take sort of a little bit more coordination with the city. And I think that kind of touches on this idea of public space. It's just really important for in a city that doesn't have a lot of public space. We have to be creative about kind of reinterpreting and creating it where we, you know, didn't otherwise have it. And yeah, I think, you know, our value really is in taking design out of the showrooms and the galleries and out of the salons and the studios, and really putting it where everyone can experience. I think accessibility is a really important thing for the festival, and that's why it needs to be kind of activated in public spaces. So that's kind of our story with the LA Design Festival. And I'll kick it over to Jody to kind of talk a little bit about Europe again, and also Vancouver.
Thank you for having the panel, Women in Architecture. It's lovely to be here. It's a lovely night out there. So thanks for joining us. I am Jody Phillips, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm going to be talking about the Dutch, what they're up to, and what we're up to here in Vancouver as well. So I've been fortunate enough to attend and even participate in Dutch Design Week that takes place in Eindhoven in the fall each year. It's produced by the Dutch Design Foundation, and it receives huge funding from both the private and the public sectors. So inarguably, Europe has a long-standing tradition on design appreciation, or it's a design literacy, I'd say, that far exceeds Canada's. Haily touched on this regarding North America in general, for sure. So furthermore, further to that, I would say that the Netherlands, and what sets them apart is their appetite for design innovation, material exploration, and just general design research. So Eindhoven, it should be mentioned, is the birthplace and home of the Phillips brand, not me Phillips, but Phillips, the multinational conglomerate. It is also the home of the Design Academy, which is if you haven't heard of it, really phenomenal design school that has cranked out and produced some of the world's most innovative young designers on the scene now. Old Phillips factories and industrial warehouses have given way to affordable studio space and access to tools and fabrication and technology and just general support. The likes of which no Canadian, I'd love to be wrong, no Canadian city has on offer, especially not currently, you know, least of which Vancouver. The image on the left is an installation at Dutch Design Week from a few years ago. It's by Envisions. They installed that, and they are actually a Dutch collective that explores material innovation. And the image on the right is a 2018 workshop IDS did with, where we partnered with Envisions, who came from the Netherlands, and we partnered them to work with students at Wilson School of Design out in Richmond. And the resulting projects were installed on the floor of the fair later that month. For this group here tonight, it's important to note, I think, that and understand the details of sort of public and private funding like we've been talking about. So I'll reiterate that the trip Envisions made to our coast was partially funded by the Dutch government. The rest of their fees, including the build out, supplies, installation, all of that, that highlighted Wilson School of Design's work was all funded privately by IDS. In other words, support from Canadian, there was zero support from Canadian governments or institutions for this initiative. So I may therefore want to make the point that with public funding comes increased community-wide engagement, arguably. The wider population of Eindhoven engages and participates during Dutch Design Week every year. And it's not just industry, it's really not just a group of design enthusiasts. Entire families show up to experience activated spaces, read placards, discuss ideas with their kids. It's a beautiful thing to see. These images on this slide are of the People's Pavilion from 2017 in Eindhoven. And the shingles are made from plastics recycled by Eindhoven residents. So they gave their recycling bins to Dutch Design Week and this group of designers, and the colors were all sorted by plastic recycler Govaplast, who created the cladding, which they called Pretty Plastic Shingle. I believe that they put this cladding into production, actually, offering it as an aesthetically pleasing alternative used for plastic waste. My point with this, though, is that the community rallied and really engaged with this project. So now I just want to talk about What If Lab, and What If Lab is another initiative by the Dutch Design Foundation in addition to their Dutch Design Week. So it receives public and private funding for sure. It matches designers and organizations based on social topics that need a fresh perspective. So there are two What If Lab initiatives that come to mind when I'm considering examples of design flexibility and public space activation. The first is this ongoing project that poses the question, what if we design all our 350 small train stations in the Netherlands to become or to be circular? Circular economy, it's a bit of a buzzword now here in Vancouver, but it's, 10 years ago that was a buzzword there. It's definitely replaced the word sustainability there. So Circular Station was the name of the initiative, and it was supported by the two big railways in the Netherlands as well as by the government. Tiered Eindhoven Studio partnered with Welling Architects, and Eindhoven has a great deal of knowledge when it comes to upgrading organic residual flows for applications in the building sector. They examined concrete border, paving stones, glass, and galvanized steel products, which, although are highly weather resistant and durable, have high CO2 emissions during their production and are difficult to then recycle. Eindhoven replaced the concrete for the seating and planter rooms with traditional Dutch mussel granules. So the image top right, Escape Agency, they used upcycled concrete railway cross beams, otherwise known as sleepers, I guess, into bioreceptive surfaces that are susceptible for microbial growth of mosses and lichen and algae. These microorganisms are very efficient with CO2 as CO2 absorbers. So once fully covered, the panels balance out the CO2 generated in the production process of the original cross beams within 1 year. So Escape Agency is proposing that bioreceptive stations be actively used as CO2 converters in the near future, which is exciting. Lastly, at the bottom there, we've got Big Architecture and Design as a finalist for this project. And they strongly believe that the connecting power of collaboration between individuals and organizations can create a stronger local network around the station by involving, informing, and encouraging visitors and travelers to participate in the improvement of the station environment and that transition to the circular station. So those are some cool projects. The second What If initiative that I wanted to talk about is actually highlights Vantot. So Vantot are a husband and wife design duo that IDS Vancouver hosted back in 2016. They participated with an installation and a panel. So this is Sunseeker, and it is a solar-powered human interactive street lighting system that will be installed in Victoria Park in Eindhoven in October. the lights follow the sun, enabling them to capture as much sunlight as possible to power up during the day. So they're actually on a tightrope, and they will move out from under, the shade of a tree or whatever to really absorb as much sun and power up. Van Tot wants the city to think about sustainability in a different way by making street lighting visible in a non-functional way. So park goers experience the light chain interactively with modules that move with the sun, like I said, but they also react to passing people when it becomes dark, and are on motion sensors and again, move up and down the tightrope. There is Sam and Esther of Van Tot there. They actually brought these pieces back in 2016. So Sunseeker contribute, and that's a detailed shot of one of those modules on the right. Sunseeker contributes to the atmosphere, experience, and the livability of the public space. So then we have, and this is not a what if lab project, but this is another project happening right now in the Netherlands, Studio Roosgaard. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dan Roosgaard, but he has his urban sun as a direct response to the pandemic. It's a great example of innovative design thinking and creative problem solving. So hold on to your hats with this one. This one's a little out there, but Urban Sun was actually a Fast Company finalist for design innovation earlier this year. This project in development by Studio Roosgaard shines a large circle of far UVC light into public spaces, sanitizing those spaces of the coronavirus. It acts as an additional layer, and I'll emphasize additional layer of the protection to current government rules. Urban Sun aims to inspire hope. It combats the negative impact of social isolation by aiming to improve cultural gatherings, sporting events, public squares, schoolyards. So I thought it was particularly appropriate for the discussion we're having this evening. I love the image on the right. It looks like she's being beamed up by a UFO. Research shows that though traditional 254 nanometer UV light is harmful, the new far UVC light with a wavelength of 222 nanometers can actually sanitize viruses safely. As Dan says, it is not the solution. So that's what's happening over in the Netherlands, just those things. Now to Vancouver. For this discussion, I've broken it into temporary private activations and permanent public ones. So another example of a response to the pandemic is this activation by IDS, by Laura Melling's studio and Studio Block. But IDS determined small activations for a week during the traditional dates of IDS, which happen in the fall. Would obviously be the way to go rather than the convention center. First of all, it would have been illegal, 34,000 people in attendance at the big fair. But this was a safe alternative and in fact, actually quite welcome by the design community. So the community wanted to support, connect, and even just be a little distracted during the fall of last year. So this is Wonderment, like I said, and it explored the connection between self and nature through the lens of regional material palettes. It was designed by Studio Block, Alyssa Lewis, and LM Studio, that's Laura Melling, and was funded by Green Theory with the venue donated by Low Tide Properties. It was safe. Again, it was a passive sort of 6 people booked a time to come and walk through the space. Low Tide Properties was a great, them donating this venue was phenomenal. I think, we're talking about public and private venues, but having access to this and getting Low Tide involved. This was the 2nd floor of a new build on Hastings and Strathcona, and it worked wonderfully for this activation. So with First Place, I'm delighted to be conceiving of and supporting activations that extend beyond the walls of the convention center and the annual dates of IDS, though there were so many killer installations and collaborations that were a great springboard within the convention center walls. So I just want to touch on those briefly. This entrance installation there were so many of my favorites. It's hard to pick, but this was one of them. This is one of them, Seattle's Electric Coffin. use no adhesive or fastening materials other than cardboard. Hopefully some of you experienced this tunnel. It was an interactive sculpture exploring man-made and natural forms becoming one. Function-wise, it effectively steered visitor traffic through an immersive 60-foot long lit tunnel and kind of fed them out at the other end at the entrance to the fair. One last slide here before I move to permanent works. So you know him, you love him. It's Brent Comer on the left. This is actually at his studio. So Brent Comer's participated at IDS several times. And this one was a collaboration with Ossenus, a Dutch design duo, again. He participated on site at IDS as well as his studio here. And then on the right, this is actually Marie Curry, the designer sculptor, her backyard. So she hosted tours through her gardens this past fall as part of IDS's Reimagine programming. Such a reprieve. Her backyard is beautiful and it was really well attended. So those are the private temporary activations. So even before choosing which current Vancouver public activations to highlight the similarities and differences between the projects in the Netherlands and here really struck me. So both regions emphasize well-being. I can say that. That is the common thread that runs through the Netherlands and here. With the Netherlands, though, innovation and sustainability are way more a driver than here. Public spaces in Vancouver more so have hopefully an obligation to culture and inclusion. So that stuck out for me. So in that vein, culture shift. I want to talk about culture shift. So it is the City of Vancouver's 10-year plan, started in 2020, that is meant to amplify and represent more accurate and inclusive voices of diverse cross-sections of people. It is meant to place particular focus on the voices of historically underrepresented communities. The subtitle of this plan, the Culture Shift Plan, is Blanketing the City in Arts and Culture. And that phrase was generously offered to the city by Musqueam textile artist Deborah Sparrow. It is supposed to underscore the critical importance of telling the truth about Vancouver's colonial history. So we should be working with local nations to address colonial erasure and ensure that their voice and presence are honored and woven throughout Vancouver's cultural ecology. So this is one example, and it is a work in progress. These are BC hydro pillars. And this is the artwork of Chief Janice George, her weaving artwork, as well as Deborah Sparrow's. So Chief Janice George is the Squamish Nation and Deborah Sparrow of the Musqueam Nation. And it's part of the Vancouver Mural Festival, a multi-part mural series that showcases Coast Salish weaving traditions shared by the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. The mural is being installed by artist Tierney Mill and with support from Renska Werner and so many other wonderful artists, all collaborating on getting this, these pillars done. So lastly, worth noting, public activations and art and culture could and should have been great places to engage Vancouver all pandemic long. I think we can agree on that. And it was the Vancouver Sculpture Biennale who encouraged everyone to head outdoors and look at the art when the pandemic started. So as far as art goes, Capture Photography Festival and Vancouver Mural Festival have contributed as well to community engagement and well-being during the pandemic with their diverse, inclusive installations. On the left, we have the newly installed Proud Youth by Chinese artist Chen Wenling as part of this year's Sculpture Vancouver Biennale. That was just installed this past winter, spring. And on the right, part of the Capture Photography Festival, one of photographer Jackie Dive's portraits of people who have lost family members to Vancouver's drug overdoses. This project is noteworthy for several reasons, least of which is that it was sponsored by a private gallery, Gallery Gachet, sure, that's wonderful. And it was also sponsored by the City of Vancouver, these bus shelters. So well-being being at the core of the places and spaces we activate in Vancouver. I'm hoping that what we lack in traditional design literacy and innovation, we make up for in a thoughtfully invigorated obligation to culture and inclusion. So there you go. I have woven in the Netherlands with Vancouver. And that's it for me. I guess let us know what questions you have. Thank you.
Yeah, Aveen and I can start reading through some questions for you if you'd like. So there's a couple on the Menti. First one, what qualities do you look for in a public space as a potential venue?
Hayley, do you want to?
I imagine all of you have different things that you're looking for different scales.
I think for us with the LA Design Festival, we look for, we love this idea of street space. And we are always looking for places that have kind of a combination of glass front and storefront, and also streetscape that we can kind of take over. And obviously we're always looking for just wide open spaces. You know, LA has a ton of parking lots that are kind of underutilized, and that's kind of, it's just that everything is owned by somebody different, so it gets a little bit complicated. But in general, like, you know, Row is kind of the perfect venue because it's a combination of open space, streetscape, retail. It's like a mini city, basically, a mini city neighborhood, but privately owned, so we can kind of play with the rules a little bit.
Sorry, Jody, do you mind if I jump in quickly? I think what you said is really interesting. It's who owns the space. I think that's such a makes a big difference. And I think, well, first of all, it depends what you're looking for a venue for, because you know, whether it's a concert or a design installation or a piece of public art, it depends. But if you work with a property developer, it's very clear who their stakeholders are. They want to keep their tenants happy. They want to bring people to the site. It doesn't necessarily mean they're all easy to work with, but their objectives are very, very clear. If you work in a public space which is controlled by a local authority, municipality, it's often a very complex process because you're working through layers of bureaucracy. No one really wants you to do anything there because it's all this extra work. Well, that's not entirely true, but there is, you know, you're having to deal with a lot of different people and jump through a lot of different hoops. So that does play a big part in it. There are some spaces, obviously, which are better to work with. But I think, like, overall, if you're looking for a venue, no matter what you're doing, whether it's something for a night or a week or a year, you want something where it's busy and is going to get the right people there. I think that's the number one thing.
Yeah, and I would say further to that, the right partners, right? The right stakeholders whose needs can be met. Also just accessibility, like from washrooms, you know, to other things like that as well, obviously. But I did mention, you know, developers are sort of this opportunity for sure, particularly here in Vancouver, but I would assume too, Hayley, in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Well, not all developers are created equal. There's some developers that are very much more committed to programming their private public space than others. And there are certain developers who are very art focused and design focused and very open to that sort of community building. So we try to find them.
All right, yeah, I can move on to the next question here. So how do you see small scale design installations contributing to design literacy in Vancouver?
Oh man. I think there's this education component that is required. It doesn't have to be shoved, you know, jammed down your throat or anything, but I mean, it's a way to engage with community in general. And so yeah, I was so fortunate to take my daughter to the Netherlands actually for one of the Dutch Design Weeks. And these activations were so design focused, but they were so informative that I could barely tear her out of there. So I think it's that programming and for the whole family, and that's where that literacy starts. You guys know me and my youth programming. If you don't, I'm very keen on it. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's the public element of all the design events around the world is so important. It's interesting. Small scale, I mean, small scale and big scale, I think it's very important. I think especially in a city like Vancouver or LA, which they're hugely young cities, and you haven't got the variety of built environment around you. Like, it just isn't there. We've got an unfair head start in London. It's like it's been there for a long time, and you've got this diverse typology of building and public space, from private gardens that have been around for 400 years to the new stuff that's coming out. And I think the more you can do different things in those spaces, the better.
All right, let's move on to the next one here. So due to the pandemic and people feeling more comfortable outdoors, have you heard of additional public spaces being created by the city to foster a sense of belonging and community?
Yeah, I can start on that. I mean, I think there have been a lot of very well publicized programs of pedestrianisation in cities. I'm in Victoria actually, and Government Street is that seems to be happening. I think it's confirmed now that they're going to pedestrianise it and do art installations down it and turn it into a public space permanently. And I think that's been the obvious one. I think there's lots of additional programming has happened in outsourced spaces as well. I know I talked about King's Cross, and everything moved outside because retail shut down in the UK for a very long time. So it was an absolutely forced thing. And I do like the question actually, that it's feeling more comfortable. People are a lot more prepared to socialise outdoors in the rain and put on that extra layer and just get on with it now. So but I think the Urban Land Institute did an amazing case study of all the good things that have happened over the last year during the pandemic. But my favorite ones are like claiming for the first time city streets. And I think especially, well, certain cities, more walkability is great.
Mm-hmm. I'd say in LA, one of the things, again, it's not public space being reclaimed. Once again, it's kind of privately driven, but I guess it is sort of public space. Before the pandemic in LA, there wasn't really a lot of like sort of cafe, outdoor dining or cafe street life. And I think one silver lining of the pandemic is that the city of LA and sort of the surrounding cities as well have really figured out how to kind of change the rules so that there can be sort of this reclaiming of parking spaces to create these pavilions and these alleys and these like actual almost like European piazza like experiences of just row after row of outdoor dining. And like cities are putting up actual what's the technical word, those things that block off the parking from the actual barriers, I guess. But we're seeing it on main thoroughfares all throughout LA and all throughout Pasadena and parts of El Segundo. And it's just great because it's created this this street life and this like sense of belonging that we should have had years ago, decades ago, but now the pandemic sort of accelerated that. And it made the city change their rules more quickly.
Mm. Do you think they're going to be removed when this is over, or are these permanent, these barriers?
They're all temporary, but I don't think that people would allow them to be
right.
removed.
Interesting.
Really enjoy this now.
Yeah.
It's becoming a part of the culture.
Yeah.
I would say though, that I know I'm speaking to the preaching to the choir here, but they need architects, right? Because a lot of people have done some very cowboy stuff with their outdoor spaces, like that awful cloudy floppy plastic that people use, and there needs to be good design solutions and not just makeshift things that cost like a couple of $100.
Totally.
So
yeah, it's interesting though, because now we're talking private again, right? Like, I actually had to read this question a couple of times because, you know, the question is about public spaces, but we really are leaning on private restaurants and people to activate privately. So,
well, but the cities have changed the zoning to allow that, and I guess
that's true.
Yeah, there's nothing in the zoning that talks about aesthetics or good design, which is the issue. So the cities need to guide
the rule book.
They do need to guide the retailers to work with the right people to be able to come up with the right solutions. So yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the hope in LA, but the fact that we actually have a chief design officer is that there will hopefully be some cohesive design thought kind of overlaid over everything. Hasn't quite happened yet, but we're working on it.
All right, let's move on to the next question here. So how do you believe places designed specifically with the pandemic in mind will adapt after the pandemic?
Well, I think we sort of answered that, but I think it's more of the conversion of temporary to permanent. I think everyone's just like done what I think everyone is in the same boat, you know, this time last year, like, oh, well, it'll be another month and it will be back to normal. And then it got longer and longer and longer, and it was autumn when we realized that it's actually going to go on for a long time. So yeah, I think people now are realizing they need new permanent solutions, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of months, because obviously, especially here in Vancouver, Victoria, you know, it's all well and good having outdoor dining now, but in a few months' time, it all changes. So there's a lot good. I guess there's going to be more wait and see.
I know someone who changed their business from art framing to plexiglass installing, right? So, you know, that was a great makeshift solution back in the spring last year. But I mean, how much plexiglass, is that the solution? No, it's not. So I think it'll have to be obviously, hopefully tweaked again.
All right, I'll go ahead here with our last question. Have the public events at festivals in London, LA, and Eindhoven affected the value of adding public spaces in new developments?
I think the need was there already. So there's obviously a little bit of opportunism, I think, if that's what the question's asking. But definitely, I mean, you know, developers, you know, their businesses, and there's interestingly, I found being here a year and a half, the developers here are so much more socially aware and want to contribute a lot more. In London, where they're in it for the money and that's it, and they're very overt about that. So for them, I speak to the guys I sort of have worked with for a number of years, they're doing it to add value to their tenants so that they get better leases and, you know, people buying their units. But it's kind of a win-win, because, you know, it's very rare that cities get to build a new park in downtown. It doesn't happen because there's not enough space to do that. So I do think it does benefit everyone, despite the fact that there may be the motives for it are commercial. I think that's answering the question.
All right, yeah, I think that's everything for our questions. Thank you everyone for sending in your questions, and thank you Jody, Will, and Haily for responding to them. I'll stop sharing now. If Jessica, you want to say anything?
Yeah, just a final thanks to everyone, especially all the panelists and everyone who joined us this beautiful night. And thanks for sending in your AIBC numbers. And a final reminder that if anyone wants to get involved, we are looking for more volunteers, and specifically a volunteer coordinator, which is very easy and fun position if you like chatting to people and getting people just connected with different committees. it's pretty flexible. So be in touch if you're interested in that, and please join for more events in the future. Hopefully we'll be online for a little bit more and then back to our old in-person eventually. So it'd be great to see everyone again. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Much.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.